We do have a ton to get through in this episode.
Common sense is finally prevailing.
There was controversy this month, Dave.
I'm not particularly excited by that.
Secrets and things on set.
I haven't told them anything.
I think this is just good times all round.
Every Doctor Who is liked by somebody, and that's a really good thing.
Davo, my doctor.
I know we disagree on this one.
First world problems, Dave.
I get why fans are asking those questions.
Oh gosh, that's actually quite a lot to talk about.
It doesn't compute.
It's the elephant in the room.
That's okay.
Fandom versus the BBC.
The cardinal sin.
Moving along.
Lunch.
G'day, I'm Rob.
And I'm Dave.
And you're listening to the Doctor Who Show, wrapping up the month of December 2024, wrapping up our 9th season of the show, Dave. 9 seasons! And of course, here we are knocking on 2025. It's pretty crazy. How are you, Dave, as the year ends?
I'm very well. Does this mean we have to start next year with the 3 podcasters or something?
That'd be nice. Actually, you will be, but we'll talk about that later.
Oh, yeah. That wasn't deliberate. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yes, no, look, I am well. It's obviously the Christmas break here. It's the summer break here in Australia. It's a beautiful, beautiful morning, blue skies, looking out over my balcony at the moment. I got to go to the cricket yesterday. I got to see Steve Smith make a century. Could be the last time I get to actually be at the ground and see Steve Smith make a century. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, he's back in form, but I wonder if that's his last time at the MCG. You know, will he retire over the year ahead?
Look, I think he wants to make the Ashes tour next year.
Okay.
But he's at that age now where, you know, you can never be quite certain that he will.
No.
And if he does, you know, will it be a day that I'm at the G? So, yeah, no, it's getting towards the end of his career. I also got to see Coley run out his playing mate,
nice.
Which was very entertaining. So, yeah, no, a good day. I'm well. How are you, Rob?
Yes. Welcome to the Cricket Show, everybody. I'm Rob, and I'm well. I do want to take the chance here at the top, Dave, to mention some recent episodes. I've put this down in my notes because a few days back, of course, we had our Joy to the World hot take. Hope everyone out there enjoyed it. If you haven't heard it, download it, please. Help our numbers. Before that, of course, we had a Gin and TARDIS on the Happiness Patrol Special Edition. Before that, we had an Alternate Galaxies on the third Lord of the Rings movie, The Return of the King. And before that, take a deep breath, we had List Makers on our top female villains in Doctor Who. And this was just December, Dave. We've been a bit busy. And I think that might have extended to you taking part in another local podcast's production.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a guest on the 42 to Doomsday Christmas Party special, which definitely has a Christmas party vibe if you listen to it. It's a very loose conversation with myself and Richard guesting on 42 to Doomsday. Yeah, yes. With myself and Richard guesting on 42 to Doomsday with Rob and Mark, which is always a pleasure. Always happy to have the lads over. And obviously, Richard and Mark do record the Gin and TARDIS episodes with us. And Rob's very welcome to, if ever he can, but unfortunately he does live literally the other side of Melbourne from the three of us, so not always easy for him.
Yeah.
I did just want to mention as well, just because you mentioned the Joy to the World hot take that we did, and
yes.
I think partly because it is, of course, Christmas, and maybe for other reasons as well, I've seen very little online commentary about this episode, and I haven't seen as many hot take podcasts released about it yet, and the ones I have seen I haven't had a chance to listen to yet because it was Christmas Day and then I was Boxing Day and then I was at the cricket all day, so I'm still really don't have much of an idea of what people thought about this. The only thing I did see was I tuned into YouTube yesterday and the review of Death Guys happened to be doing their live broadcast of their YouTube hot take, so I tuned into that for about 15 minutes and they seemed to be in a very similar place to us, you know. It wasn't bad, I didn't hate it, but I'm not sure what it was and I'm not sure if I liked it.
Yeah, I've engaged with a little conversation online and I've heard the podcast from the Explain Later guys, our good friends at Explain Later.
Yep, I have that tuned up, it's one of the ones.
But a lot of the commentary, and maybe we'll talk about this if we talk ratings in the news, has been more to do with the ratings than actually talking about the episode. So you're right, there's not as much commentary out there as I thought there would be at this point.
No, but look, I know that those podcasts will start to be released and I will start to get to listen to them. There'll be more engagement online and hopefully we'll hear from our listeners what they thought about our hot take and the episode. So just interesting. It's a particularly quiet time even by Doctor Who standards, I think.
It is. All right. Now, before we get into the show, and sorry for all this housekeeping, folks, some reviews have come through on Apple Podcasts, and we always read those at the start of the show. So let's tic-tac on these, Dave. I'll go first. Must listen for every Whovian 5 stars from Jason Tora from Australia via Apple Podcasts, 17th of November. Rob and Dave's podcast is a fantastic deep dive into everything Doctor Who. Their discussions are spot on, blending insightful analysis with genuine passion for the series. Whether you're dissecting classic episodes or exploring modern storylines, they keep it engaging and thought-provoking. It's the perfect listen for anyone who loves getting into the nitty-gritty of the Whoniverse. Highly recommend giving it a go. Cheers from Jeremy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeremy. Hopefully you're in, one of the good parts of Australia.
By which Dave means Melbourne.
Yeah, well, yes, I do. They're all good. Tasmania's okay.
It is.
I have one here from Zapringo in the United States, also via Apple Podcast, also 5 stars, called A Fantastic Podcast. I only recently began listening to this show after hearing one of the hosts on another podcast I'd been enjoying, Pull to Open with Pete Paschal and Chris Taylor. Yep, I guessed it on that one. Very good podcast. Check them out. Mm-hmm. And I have been absolutely loving it. These two are two wonderfully knowledgeable and open-minded fans willing to give any piece of Doctor Who media fair and measured analysis, even the bits they dislike or don't care much for. I'm particularly impressed by their ability to express those negative views without any needlessly inflammatory rhetoric. I would go so far as to call Rob and Dave the Siskel and Ebert of the Doctor Who fandom, a duo I can trust to have interesting and engaging conversations on any topic they so desire to cover, not to mention the alternate galaxies line discussing other sci-fi and fantasy, such as Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. The excitement I felt when it was revealed that this would be Dave's first time seeing those films was like Christmas morning.
Wow.
I would rate 6 stars if such a rating wouldn't render the entire scale meaningless. Keep up the exceptional work, and much thanks for providing such an excellent show.
Wow, Zapringo, thank you so much. And I'm really happy to hear that even when we dislike stuff, and we do dislike stuff, and we do talk about stuff we dislike, we don't go crazy.
Yeah, that's certainly what we aim for. So no, thank you very, very much. Look, I'm not that familiar with Siskel and Ebert, except that every so often on my YouTube feed will come up, look at what Siskel and Ebert said about Star Wars in 1977. So I'm sort of aware of them, but not that aware. I guess
I know that one of them's dead. I don't know what that says about us.
I assume that they're the Dave and Margaret of America.
Yes. And the best Doctor Who podcast there is 5 stars by Field 357. Now, I know Field 357 has left us, I think, 2 or 3 reviews over the last maybe 2 or 3 years. So thank you again, Field 357, for leaving us a review. It is only a quick one, though. If you are a Doctor Who fan, this is the podcast for you, says Field 357. Short and sweet, but thank you so much. All these reviews help us.
Fantastic. Well, that's enough talking about us. Let's talk about the world of Doctor Who, Rob.
Yes, we've done enough housekeeping. Let's get into it, Dave, with some news. Let's start with unconfirmed rumours, because they're always fun.
It's rumour watch time.
Yes, let's start with that. And I'll begin by saying, as a podcast, we get sent all sorts of messages from listeners on the down low, as it were. Now, sometimes these are just people who are reading Reddit and telling us what they've seen over there on Reddit by way of rumours, and they don't want to be attached to the rumour because, well, for starters, it's not their rumour. And I think there's an element of not wanting their name attached to something that might be pure BS.
Yep.
But they do still want us to know that it's a thing that people are talking about, so they tell us about that. And then there's other people who contact us, and they actually have industry contacts or have been doing their own investigative work, and their messages are always interesting too, Dave. And what I found fascinating this past month in particular is we've had everything from Shooty is gone. They recorded 2 endings to season 2. He's going to regenerate. He's done. He's dusted. Stick a fork in it. All of that. Through to Disney's already decided they don't want to do more Doctor Who, but they're not going to announce it before they screen the 2nd season because that would, cruel the numbers, such as they are. Doctor Who is toast, basically. Then on the other end of the scale, Bad Wolf is pressing on, Dave, even without Disney's decision to continue. They're going to make 12 episodes at once. It's going to go out as 2 seasons. Now, I don't know whether that means 5 episodes in the main season and a Christmas story, and that's the 6, and then they do that twice. I don't know. All of that's unclear, but there are just so many rumours out there right now. I think it's highly likely that one of them will come true, given the law of averages and all of that.
Yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating. As you say, we're very grateful to our listeners and friends of the podcast who send us these tips. And I've got to say, none of them send them with a sort of I have the absolute word of God on this. They're always very appropriately caveated, saying, look, this is my source, this is the level of reliability I give to my source, take it or leave it. And it's really good to have sort of that sort of sensible, moderate sort of feedback coming in, and we can put it all into the mix. But as you say, the rumours that are out there are everything from the show is absolutely cancelled and he's not coming back, full stop, Disney hates it,
Yep.
through to people who have seen industry adverts for the Bad Wolf Company clearly looking to start production on a show that sounds very much like Doctor Who. And these are not hiring actors or anything like that. These are the people that you put in place when you're doing pre-production. The people who sort of pay everybody's wages and make sure the checks go out and book venues and hire the catering van. There is something gearing up at Bad Wolf. Once again, we don't know. Once again, I am fairly confident Disney will not make a final decision until they've seen real numbers for season 2. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm sort of putting everything on hold. I do suspect, though, that Bad Wolf itself is getting ready to keep going, whether they have Disney money or not.
Yeah, that's the one thing some people have got to get over. They think if Disney drops it, then Doctor Who is done. And no, even RTD's been out on the front foot in the past, saying that if Disney were to disappear, the show would still get made. It would just have a smaller budget. And they do, I think he said, they do more haunted house style episodes because, they're obviously cheap to do. So the show's going to go on irrespective of Disney. And I think some YouTubers in particular really need to get over that. Oh, Disney's going to drop it, Doctor Who's done. No, that's not how it works.
Yeah, I mean, how they do it, when they do it, and what they do will obviously be very different. But there's certainly the intention of Bad Wolf to keep going, and presumably the BBC to keep buying it off Bad Wolf. The other thing that's out there where there is a slightly smaller spectrum of rumour is the future of Ncuti Gatwa himself.
Yeah.
Now, we've definitely had everything from he hates his work on the show, they hate work with him, and as soon as they can mutually part ways, they will, through to, no, he loves it and he's absolutely doing a third season. But I will say on this one, the rumours do skew a lot more towards he's probably only going to do 2 seasons. Now, that doesn't mean that this isn't the thing where the law of averages means that, the median or the average is correct. It could be that the outlier is the correct one. But it is just interesting that a lot of the rumour that we hear is not, thank God he's leaving, it's just, we're just hearing that, this was a thing in his career, he's done it, and he wants the next thing in his career, and he's moving on.
Yeah. Personally, I'd love it if they do record another 2 seasons back-to-back, even if they're short, like as that one rumour is, 2 seasons of 6 episodes. Because then that would be like 4 seasons of Ncuti, albeit short seasons. And I think that would be a good run, even though he only sort of recorded it in 2 blocks over several years.
Yeah, I think it's definitely better for the health of the show if a Doctor's around for at least 3 years.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's 3 seasons or 3 calendar years or whatever you want to call it. I think that we've seen with Eccleston, as much as I love Eccleston and I love that first season, it's just not enough to really get the show in the consciousness of people. How often do we see Eccleston left off lists of new Doctors or sort of forgotten or whatever, because there just isn't enough of him out there. And I think if Ncuti did a quick 2 and disappeared, then that would be not as good for the show as it could be. I think a Doctor needs to establish themselves.
Yeah, well, I think of Jodie. I think of the backlash against Jodie when she came in, and by the time she was leaving, a lot more people were genuinely into her, and a lot more people were sad than I think they would have been if she had left after 2 seasons. Just being around, being the incumbent year after year, people do get used to you, and they get sad when you leave, yeah.
Yeah, plus the actor or actress does need to find the role. I mean, look, Peter Davison, I think even as a big Davo fan, Rob, you would agree Peter Davison gets better as the Doctor the more he does?
Yes, absolutely.
As much as I love season 7 Pertwee, I think Pertwee hits the ground running in many ways, you don't really see the fully formed third Doctor we think of as being the third Doctor until 2 or 3 years into his run.
Yeah.
And then that back 2 or 3 years is very much his. The exception is probably Tom Baker, who had the advantage that he was just playing Tom Baker.
Yeah.
so he didn't have to find his character. But yeah, I mean, even great Doctors do take time to get into the role. And I think if Ncuti had a 3rd season, it would be a better performance and a better finding of the character than 1 and 2. But who knows? The point is, there are a lot of rumours, and the chances are probably 5% are true.
Yeah. Shall we move on?
We should. Big news for me, speaking of Season 7, the next Blu-ray box set has been confirmed to be Doctor Who Season 7, my all-time favourite season with my favourite companion. It includes my favourite story. It has my second favourite Doctor, who was my childhood favourite Doctor. There is so much to love in this. I said online, in my view, this is 3 10 out of 10s and a 9.5 out of 10. So I'm very excited about this season coming out in the new year. We know a bit about it already. We know there's going to be a whole bunch of new docos, including one dedicated to the Brig,
yes.
And including one dedicated to Malcolm Hulke, which is really important. My favourite writer, another favourite on there. So, really, really good. They are doing some more behind the sofas. I'm glad they've got the Fifth Doctor team together, although I don't think Davo's on there, but Sarah Sargent, Janet Fielding and Matthew Waterhouse are always really good. Sophie Aldred's really good. Unfortunately, they have got Toby Haydock on there. I know a lot of people like Toby Haydock, but I found when he did On the Couch before, there's a lot of, I know what's coming up, let me tell you what's coming up and why I like it and why this doesn't work. It's like, just shut up and let them watch the thing, Toby.
Yeah.
So hopefully if Toby's back, he will just shut up and let the actual companion just watch it and react, not him being a bit of a know-it-all.
Yeah.
As adorable as I'm sure he is.
I prefer when it's people from the show doing that sort of stuff. There were some of the earlier box sets. It must have been a COVID thing. Do you remember they had like fans on the couch?
Yes.
And I didn't like those half as much as when it's actual people from Doctor Who.
Yes, or people sort of, tangentially involved with the new series watching something and going, what's this about?
Yeah, I mean, I sit there thinking, this is just what we do on the podcast. You wouldn't put this podcast on the Blu-ray, so why are you people on here?
Yeah, so look, that'll be interesting. That's a bit of editorialising. I'm sure I'll get hate mail because, everybody loves Toby Haydock. Oh well. Sorry, guys.
These things happen.
Speaking of hate mail, there are going to be apparently movie-length omnibus editions of The Silurians and Inferno. Look, that's great. I will never watch them because why would you cut anything out of two perfect stories? But maybe some people just don't want to watch a seven-parter, and there will be an option for them. But looking forward to this, but particularly given that I was reflecting on this. When I was first growing up watching these stories as a boy here in Australia, The Silurians and Ambassadors of Death were in black and white, and Inferno was barely in colour.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I can remember that excitement in the early 90s when those black and white Pertwees were being recolorised with that early NTSC conversion mixing technology, and just watching them going, this is so cool to see these in colour, even though it doesn't quite, work, the colour's a little bit off in places. Then there was another level of recolorisation for the DVD releases, which was really good, and potentially seeing all of that done at Blu-ray level, I think is genuinely really exciting.
Yeah. Oh, I love all that technology. I love... Is that Graham Kennedy in the background there? They would film the footage on the screen and somehow it would pick up dots which they could then decode into what colours should be on the screen. And I'm like, oh my God, this is just incredible, the stuff they were doing back in the 90s, let alone what they can do with colour now. Yes,
no, it's really exciting. I am really hoping that they have the ABC back announce for Inferno Episode 1 from, I think it was the 1986 screening, where I'm fairly sure it was Edwin Marr was doing the back announce, and he said, Doctor Who and the Green Man will be back again tomorrow. There's plenty of Doctor Who merchandise available at the ABC shop, but probably not a Green Man.
Oh, it'd be great if they grabbed that.
I hope someone... I mean, we used to have it on our off-air VHS copy somewhere. I'm sure some fan has it somewhere, because it was quite infamous at the time, this sort of, this back announcer. Obviously, the guy had been watching it and just thought I was going to throw that in, because what's that Green Man at the end of episode 1 of Inferno? So, yeah, fun times.
I'm just going to ad-lib.
Yes.
Moving along, some listeners may know this past week saw the War Games go out in the UK in colour, a similar recipe to what they did with the Daleks around the time of the 60th anniversary. It's cut down in length and it's colourised. We, of course, down here in Australia don't get to see it. Like the Daleks, we'll have to buy the DVD or the Blu-ray if we want to see it officially and legally at least. But there's lots of clips out there, Dave. We've already commented to one another off mic about the insert of some CGI here and there and whether that quite works. And also the scene where the Time Lords ask Pat Troughton to choose his new face, which now shows, spoilers everyone, New Who Doctors. And it's sort of a fun idea, but quite bizarrely they have publicity shots of Capaldi, Tennant, Whittaker and so on. And it just looks so odd because they're in their costumes and they're doing action poses with sonic screwdrivers. And I just think, no. if you wanted to do this, sure, have Capaldi, Tennant, Whittaker, have their faces, but just have very neutral headshots. Maybe stick those heads on generic bodies, maybe bodies that are just in sort of shapeless robes. So it feels like these are brand new faces, brand new looks that Pat can choose from. They haven't been used before, in quotation marks. They haven't been out there in the universe waving sonic screwdrivers and wearing brown pinstripe suits and so on. You know, having a publicity shot of Tennant in that suit, I think it was a Day of the Doctor publicity shot, Dave. It just didn't make sense. It looked weird. What did you think of that? What did you think of the War Games in colour?
So, cards on the table, Rob.
Yes?
I'm obviously not predisposed to think very well of these things. I have very deliberately and by choice really made no comments online about this because, you know, we don't need more negativity in Doctor Who fandom. But as I said when the Daleks came out, I kind of appreciate what they're trying to do. I kind of appreciate what they're going for in trying to introduce old stories to a new generation. I don't like it. I don't need these stories to be different. I certainly don't need them to be cut down. I certainly don't need 10 episodes of the War Games cut down to 90 minutes and sort of taking a lot of the tension and then the characterization out of it. It's an interesting experiment for those who like it. That's fine. And so, you know, given that that's my view, I'm not going to see something whimsical like putting new Doctors in there and be particularly predisposed to it. And I'm not. I get it. It's good for a laugh. I did have a bit of a chuckle at the very politically correct removal of the "he's too fat" because you can't say that anymore. You know, that was weird. There were some other insertions in there that I thought was a bit weird. I thought the CGI of the War Games headquarters looked a bit like a 90s computer game or something, Age of Empire or something, which was a little bit weird. They did a couple of things with the War Chief's character that I think is just fan wank, really. Look, again, if it's a way to introduce a story to somebody and they've enjoyed it, look, that's fine. They can watch it. They can spend their money on the Blu-ray. I'm not declaring jihad or anything like that.
No.
But as I said at the time we talked about the Daleks, I think that's like trying to introduce somebody to the Sgt. Pepper album by making them listen to 2 covers by Taylor Swift. And, yes, they're like, oh, that's really interesting. I've never enjoyed that song before, but just listening to a Taylor Swift cover with a remix of, with a little help from my friends, actually show you what the Beatles album was like, or is it something that's not quite there? For me, it's the latter. I get it. I've had my whinge. As I say, I'm not trying to throw negativity out there, but it's not for me.
Yeah. I'd throw in, it'll really suit some people, and it'll really not suit some people. And I think the reviews correspondingly have been really mixed. I've been out there having a bit of a look around, Dave. My sense is, though, they're a touch more positive than they were for the Daleks, and I've actually pulled out a selection and emailed them through to you. So do you want to join me in reading some?
Yes, would you like to kick us off?
I can. This is from Luke, who is on X as @Mothra's Attorney. Luke says, the colorization here is probably the best I've seen in any medium. This used to be black and white. It's seamless. Whatever gripes you have about the War Games in colour, we are utterly spoiled these days.
There's one from one of our favourite commentators, Mad Lawrence Miles, at @the_Beasthouse. Mm-hmm. I hope everyone involved in that monstrosity dies from cancer of their lack of self-awareness gland.
Wow.
Yes, we should make old Doctor Who more accessible to younger generations who might be interested, but not by assuming they're idiots who want to stare at awful digital effects and can't watch a studio-bound scene without an action movie score being shat all over it.
Tell us what you really think, Mad Larry. Hysterian @HysterianYT on X says, I'll start with the positives first. The colorization work itself is fantastic. A visual treat to see Tu, Jamie, Zoe, and the rest of the cast like this. Also, that they use the Confession Dial's recreation of the regeneration, a brilliant inclusion. Now on to the negatives. The sound mixing is somehow even worse than the Daleks in colour, like I genuinely do not know how they managed it. Dialogue was incredibly hard to make out at times because of how loud the music and effects were. My biggest issue with the whole thing, though, was the editing. Cutting down a 10-part, 4-hour story into one full story lasting just under an hour and a half is a difficult task. Really difficult. And it really shows in the editing. The first 25 minutes is absolutely fine, I'll say that. Virtually everything after that is rushed, though. Things that took a while to unfold in the original now happen off-screen and are talked about by the warlords in a matter of seconds.
Alistair McGowan at A McGowan. This colorisation on Doctor Who The War Games is insanely good. Lovely, realistic grading which looks like a colour dad's army. Utterly convincing.
Philip Morris, there's a name people know, at Archives1963 says, tonight's War Games was a total travesty, rewriting history to fit into New Who. Fan fiction at its worst. Total disregard for the past, not content with killing the modern show, pissing all over past creatives. They will never match.
And finally, Sam Shaw at Sam Straw Draws. The War Games is my favourite regeneration story in Doctor Who, so I was kind of nervous, but considering the task, I thought they did an amazing job. Some bits were hacked to bits, but the parts you want to see elevated were done so brilliantly. Thanks, BBC. So look, the full spectrum of comments there. I think, some people are always very, very sensitive to a rewriting of history, if you like. And I get that. I'm sympathetic to that. I like to think I'm, old enough now to kind of move on from my cynical thoughts there. But I get people, not liking characters rewritten or scenes changed. And that angers people. It sounds like they've done a very professional job on this. So if it's something you want to see, if you need a 90-minute colour War Games in your life, this is probably a good version of it. It's just not something I need in my life.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is the colour seems to be really good. And in the clips I've seen, I'll agree, it looked amazing. That one comment was, this used to be black and white, Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, look, I have no doubt it does, but people will form their own judgment. Very quickly, we just need to do Ratings Watch as our final piece of news. Now, I've pulled together some stats from across various different things. I believe that on Christmas Day, the overall average rating for Doctor Who Joy to the World was 4.11 million. Now, that was the 6th most watched show on Christmas Day. The most watched was something called Gavin and Stacey, which got 12.3. Wallace and Gromit got 9.4. The King got nearly 6 million.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I did see somebody post the 10-minute breakdowns, which showed that the show before it, Strictly, which I believe is a dancing show, that finished with 4.6 million. Doctor Who then started to slide, and at 5:40 it hit its low point of 3.8 million, and then there was a climb to finish at 5 million before 8 million people opened Wallace and Gromit a few moments later. So there is some speculation that Strictly and Wallace and Gromit were both very, very high, and sort of people stayed on a bit after that and watched a bit of Doctor Who, and then as they were tuning on to watch Wallace and Gromit, the audience raised a bit. I can also say that in Australia, Joy to the World was the number 1 show on Disney+.
Was it?
In the US, it was number 9 briefly.
Okay.
So all of which I think just continues this view I have that we're in this, for Doctor Who fans, a very bizarre purgatory type, sort of limbo type situation where the answer to the question, is Doctor Who still the big flagship, zeitgeist-altering, everybody's watching it thing that it was back in the early 2000s? The answer is very clearly no. Is Doctor Who still a very well-watched show that has its place in the running order and gets a audience? The answer is absolutely yes. Those two things can exist in the same space and time.
Yeah, I mean, some people get all kinds of upset whenever podcasts talk ratings, but I think there's no point running from them. I think the real disconnect in the debate is on one side you've got the we hate Doctor Who, yet we talk about it all the time type YouTubers who are absolutely reveling in what looks like a low overnight. They're making 10-minute videos just to say that it got 4.1 million viewers. It takes 10 minutes to get to that point. On the other side, though, you have the Everything is Awesome Brigade who, they point out, quite rightly, that Doctor Who was slugging it out with Strictly, going blow for blow, essentially. And Strictly is a big thing in the UK. I mean, Brits just go crackers for it. When we had Strictly come dancing over here, I think it was more of a novelty. It wasn't a cultural phenomenon, but, I'll park that. That said, the Wallace and Gromit thing where, Wallace and Gromit is a family audience, Doctor Who is a family audience, and suddenly 5 million more people show up for Wallace and Gromit. It shows that there's a percentage of the audience who just don't want to turn up for Doctor Who anymore. So I would say Doctor Who isn't in great shape at present, but it's also not on life support.
I'm also quite impressed that Wallace and Gromit did so well, given that its only actor died and one of its writers has died. So it's turning out pretty well, given that.
Yeah, not bad at all. Shall we move on?
Yes.
All right, on to short topics. This is going back some weeks for me now, Dave, but Last of the Time Lords was on the ABC recently, and I caught the last 10 minutes of it, and I was really taken with it all over again. But one thing I noticed, and this became a chat with one of our listeners on X, I don't know if he wants to be named or not, so I'll err on the side of caution and not name him, is the way that Martha puts the Doctor in his place when she tells the story of her mate who was really into a guy and the guy never noticed her. And of course, that's her finally telling Tennant in a gentle, allegorical way how he's stuffed up in her eyes and she's had enough. They're still going to be mates, but she recognises they're never going to be more than that, so she's leaving. And I just contrasted that in my head and in this conversation with this chap on the way Donna and Rose in The Star Beast have a go at the Doctor on at least 2 occasions. But the one I really remember the most is when he's told he doesn't understand something because he's, quotation marks, male presenting. And I'm sure I said this on the hot take at the time, and if I didn't, I should have. I mean, what an utter absurdity to tell someone they can't understand something because of all things, their gender. I mean, can you imagine that in the reverse? You wouldn't understand XYZ because you're female. I mean, that wouldn't fly in a million years, would it? So why does it fly in the way it's presented? Park that. That's not my real topic. When Martha took the Doctor to task, it was because of his failings, things he hadn't done. She didn't take a generic, I'm going to blame this situation on you simply being a man, because presumably Martha is smart enough to know that men come in all shapes and sizes with all manner of interests and personalities, and lumping them into one box would be ridiculous, so she didn't do it. Yet in The Star Beast, the Doctor has failed not because of a personal shortcoming, which would be an entirely fair thing to call him out on if there was something, but simply that he's a bloke. And I'm coming to the point now, Dave, you know, when people talk about the writing in those specials, and indeed the first season of Shooty's era, to be a little all over the place, a little more virtue signally, a little message of the week, you just need to go back to older RTD stuff like I stumbled across by accident in this example, and see that the difference is extraordinary. It's the same bloke writing, yet a very, very different way of presenting things. Incredible.
Yeah, I think when we go back and watch the 2023 year of Doctor Who and sort of, you know, the 6 months either side, there will be a time when we'll watch that and go, wow, that is very 2023.
Yeah.
I just think it's going to, the way that language is used is going to sound very specific to a very particular time where pendulums are swinging, you know, to one extreme and the other, and I think it's all going to moderate and it'll all be seen. But yeah, that's an interesting contrast. I watched something far less controversial.
Oh, yes.
Which is Fort of Doomsday. Now, I don't know whether I just randomly wanted to watch this or whether I was listening to Pull to Open and they mentioned this was where they were going next. And that just stuck in my brain. I thought, I haven't watched that for ages. Because I didn't sit there and think, I've got to watch that before Pull to Open did their episode on it. But maybe it was just a brainworm that got me. I don't know. Could have been coincidence. But I did watch it because I haven't seen it in quite a while. And I was very impressed by how good it looks. It's got that first story of the season money. The costumes look good. The sets look great. You know, big spaceships and lots of cast and lots of extras. It looks really good. It's really clear that this is Davo's first performance in the role because they had to move Fort of Doomsday forward after J&T kind of forgot to make sure the production of the first story was all sorted before he went off to a convention in America and got back to find it all falling apart, and Barry Letts was sort of waiting in his office going, you naughty producer, you.
Yeah.
Never do that again. You don't go off and have fun in America unless you've got the story sorted, son.
Yeah, exactly.
So you know, you can feel Davo trying some things and some of them don't quite work. I think Matthew Waterhouse gives a good performance given the atrocious script that is written for him. But I did think it all kind of does fall apart as we get more into the story. It gets just more and more bonkers and more bizarre. Good cast, you know, Stratford Johns is really good. He plays Monarch really well. I must admit, I still love the cricket ball scene. And as a kid, it absolutely worked. I was just amazed at what happened. And then I remember turning to Dad and going, why? How did that work? And Dad explaining, you know, how things work in space and because there's no da-da-da that keeps going and all the rest of it. So, you know, that's exactly what the show was meant to do and it does work. It did get me thinking, though, that it does highlight the problem with Doctor Who being a time travel show, in that we always think of things prior to when it's made as being in the past. But, of course, for the Doctor, it's all in the past. And this is one example where he's saying, well, these 3 million Obankans want to come and coexist on Earth. And at some point, wouldn't he say, well, look, I've been to the future many times and I've never met 3 million Obankans on Earth. So, sorry, 3 billion, I should say. So, clearly that doesn't happen. Now, is it because I stopped them or something? And I guess it's just one of those weird things that comes up. I'll mention quickly as well, I listened to the Big Finish story, The Kingmaker, which is another one of those Hartnell tales. Again, this one told by William Russell, who's a fantastic audio actor, and just another really fun Hartnell historical on Big Finish. And now that I've found this little mini range, I'm really quite enjoying them.
Oh, that's really good. My final short topic, Dave, I just want to say our listeners are the best, because it seems fitting here at the end of the year to reflect a bit. And I just want to say I really do appreciate our listeners, because it was brought home to me recently when, of all things, I was watching a YouTube streamer streaming a video game. And this stream had a pretty healthy chat box popping while the host was speaking, but something I noticed about that chat was how lockstep everyone was with this guy, how echo chambery it all was, pretty much aside from me. I felt like I was in Bizarro World, as he was saying all this stuff about the game, and I'm sitting there thinking, no, that's not right, and that's a very odd statement, and, that's not really backed up by anything. I'm sitting there having all these thoughts, but everyone else seemed to think it was really good stuff. Now, obviously they're fans of the guy, so you expect there's probably some correlation. They maybe think similarly to him, but there seemed to be no independent thought going on among them at all, apart from me. Long story short, Dave, this is why I love our listeners. I've lost count, literally, of the messages and the comments and the reviews and the communications in general we get from listeners, and have done over many, many years. I mean, this is our 9th season. And I swear, in every second or third one, and you'll attest to this, there'll be a comment along the lines of, I don't always agree with you guys, or I was spitting out my cornflakes when you said X, Y, Z, and whatever. And I'm always like, yes, this is what I want. This is what it's about. I'm not here, and I know you're not here, Dave, to have our egos stroked or our tummies tickled by an echo chamber. I know I'm not that insecure. I love our listeners having their own ideas about things and telling us about them, politely, of course, which our listeners are great at. I couldn't think of anything worse than running an echo chamber. And sure, I know people do agree with us too. That's fine. Maybe even regularly if they're a particular kind of person of a particular age, that's very normal. But I just adore when someone will say, I bloody love your thoughts on Dragonfire, but on Logopolis, you're completely out of your tree, Great. Love it. I wouldn't have that any other way, so thank you, and keep it up, everybody.
Yes, no, thank you to our listeners for being listeners, first and foremost. But yes, for the way you engage with us, it is really, really quite wonderful. And again, sometimes listeners will write in with a perspective, and sometimes I go, look, I don't agree with that, but nice to hear from it. And sometimes you go, hey, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. And now you put it there. Okay, yeah, that's a different way to look at it. And that's really cool. And that's what engagement is about. That's what we used to do, sitting around, drafty church halls as fans in the 80s. Yeah. And now we get to do it with, slightly more sophisticated technology with people on the other side of the world. And, that is just bonkers and wonderful.
Yeah, agree.
Now, speaking of the podcast, we did do our Gin TARDIS on the Happiness Patrol during the course of the month. Mm-hmm. And we had a bit of a conversation about this, Rob, that you thought was worth having on mic, because I did say to you that it was a very interesting recording experience watching the Happiness Patrol special edition for the first time with Richard and Mark.
Yeah.
And look, just to go a bit behind the curtain on the podcast here, listeners, even though the Gin TARDIS is not scripted in any way, and there's it's all recorded live. It's our instant reactions after turning off the TV, having had a couple of gins. I do sort of prepare in a couple of days before and go, okay, what are some of the dot points I think we might want to cover? What is a kind of approach we might want to take in terms of the structure of the conversation? And, we'll intro here, we'll sort of do this. For example, if we're doing the gunfighters, I have a reasonable idea of what my reaction is going to be, what Richard's reaction is going to be. I can probably guess what Mark's reaction is going to be, and kind of prepare for a way to structure that conversation, which is then informed by the watching. Go, okay, we didn't like part 3 nearly as much as I thought we would. That's now a point of conversation.
Yeah.
When I got to the Happiness Patrol, as I was watching it, I realised that everything I'd prepared was going to have to go out the window because it was just such a different recording and viewing experience to what I had expected. In that I'd expected, certainly myself and potentially other guys, to go, you know what, this is a bit of an underrated gem. There's a lot of really good stuff happening here. I really quite enjoyed that. But I found that I wasn't enjoying it nearly as much as I thought I would. And that wasn't the narrative I expected. And in particular, I think looking back, I was surprised at how much the additions in the special edition actually detracted from the story. Now, don't get me wrong, listeners. I'm not saying that it's bad that it exists. I think it's a fantastic, well-made production, and it's a really interesting thing to see, particularly to see all the cut footage, nearly 10 minutes across 3 episodes, probably more, 12 minutes across 3 episodes of restored footage. But the two big things were, I think, it made the story a lot looser, and consequently made the world of Terra Alpha seem a lot smaller, particularly when they just go back and forth to the candy kitchen, or you'd have multiple introductions of the Candyman before he was really needed in the story. That was all a bit of a fault. But also the big expansive CGI shots of Terra Alpha, and then cutting down to a very small studio where as I said, watching it, literally you can see 6 Happiness Patrol members all squeezed onto one side of a studio that then, when the director says action, have to menacingly stalk 2 paces to the middle of the studio because that's all the room there is. It just looks really small when contrasted with the CGI. So as interesting as I thought it really detracted from the story. And the next time I watch Happiness Patrol, I'll definitely watch the broadcast version and see if that restores my view of it. Now, Rob, have you watched the season 25 since we did this? Or since we last spoke?
Not all of it, but I have watched the Happiness Patrol because that's the one that Pete McTighe had talked up in months prior and perhaps oversold, because I had a similar experience with it, particularly the new CGI effects. There's one main one they use and reuse and reuse. It's a one-trick pony. If people haven't seen it, essentially at the start of a scene, particularly ones that are outside, they'll sort of hit pause on the tape and sort of start high up in Terra Alpha's skyline and pull down, and then as they get into where the actual real footage is, they'll sort of hit play on the tape and people will start moving around. And it's this cheap sort of way of making it look like it's a big place. But as you say, it does look weird when there's only like half a dozen people there and they're sort of pushed off just to one side of the set. But also, again, it's a one-trick pony thing because they do it over and over and over and over. They don't sort of have any other tricks up their sleeve when it comes to the new effects, or at least not that I noticed.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's a great experiment, but I don't think it quite works. And look, I can remember when the VHS with the extra scenes in Curse of Fenric came out, only about 18 months after Curse of Fenric was broadcast.
Yes.
And everybody who'd sort of gone, oh, Curse of Fenric was good, but it didn't make sense, saw the extended edition with all the cut footage and goes, my God, this is a classic piece of Doctor Who. It all now makes sense.
Yeah.
And then they said, we're doing another one with specially extended edition of Silver Nemesis. And we're going, great, maybe that'll make sense. And we watched it and gone, no, doesn't help.
Yeah.
It was never there. And this is another example, I think, that the scenes that were cut correctly. There's a couple with Susie Q that establishes her character a bit better that I did like seeing, but for the most part, it's guff, it's padding, it makes the story looser, not tighter, and I think that the tight edited version is the better one.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with that wholeheartedly.
Wow, Rob, we've spoken for, I think this is a record before we've got to a main topic. I'm sorry, listeners.
Yeah, I've got my producer hat on, Dave, and we've been very loose on this episode. But hey, listeners, it's the end of the year. You're about to get a bumper episode, I think.
Yes, well, look, we'll see how we go. But we did have a lot to talk about because it is big time for the show.
Yeah, so look, without any further ado, let's get into our feature, which is On an Adventure in Space and Time, the 2013 telemovie that went out as part of the 50th anniversary celebrations. And Dave, I think it might be worthwhile to start off with why did we pick this? And from my side, you made the suggestion, and I was happy to run with it, because I hadn't seen this for a very long time. I mean, how long? I couldn't tell you, but it's easily years. And even then, I think the last time I saw it might have only been a quarter of it or something like that. So in terms of a proper watch of the whole thing that I can remember, I'm going to say I'm probably going back to 2013. And so I thought, yeah, this would be a really nice thing to return to after more than a decade to watch it properly. I think The last time I even thought about this was maybe a year ago when they updated the ending of it to have the Hartnell Doctor looking at Ncuti Gatwa now in that TARDIS scene at the end. I think that's probably the version they get on the iPlayer in the UK. I don't even know if it's available on the iPlayer all year round in the UK. Maybe answers on a postcard from our UK listeners. But that's where I was at with regard to picking this. It's all on you, Dave.
Yeah, so we were looking for something easy to discuss in our Christmas episode,
That's
knowing
true.
that we were very busy in our real world lives because, it's Christmas, it's the end of the year. We were very busy in our podcasting lives because this is the 5th episode we've put out this month.
Yeah.
And also I think knowing that, we, with a lot to talk about in the wash up for the Christmas special and everything, there would be, we didn't want to have a full hour, talking about an entire big season of Doctor Who. Let's find something that goes for about 80 minutes and talk about it. That's easy. So that was the practical, pragmatic reason for picking it. But also, as you say, it's been 11 years since this was broadcast. It's been a long time since I've watched it, and that's for a couple of reasons. It's got a bit of a Christmassy vibe, so I thought it was appropriate. Now, I've got a bit of a longish spiel about my journey with this. Do you want me to start here, or do you want to give some reactions first?
No, start with your spiel. I'll work in with it.
So I've had a big roller coaster journey over the years with An Adventure in Space and Time. Mm-hmm. I remember when it first came out, and it was part of that wonderful, just brilliant Indian summer that was the 50th anniversary. We had Day of the Doctor in the cinema, and that was really good. We had The Enemy of the World and Web of Fear returned, which was a really big deal. We had some great merchandise coming out, not least of which was Richard Marston's fantastic biography of John Nathan Turner. We had The Night of the Doctor as a little surprise. We had the Five-ish Doctors made by Davo. There was so much good stuff happening in there. And in the middle of that, we got this doco-drama about the creation of Doctor Who. And I can remember it falling absolutely into that wonderful spirit. I saw it for the first time. I know I illegally downloaded a copy because you couldn't get it in Australia at first. So I did torrent it, and I think the statute of limitations on torrenting is less than 11 years, so I'm safe.
Yeah.
But I did torrent it to watch it in Australia, and I thought this is absolutely just gorgeous and mind-blowing. About a week later, I was over at my parents' place, and it happened to be broadcast on, I think, one of the minor ABC channels. Mm-hmm. And the whole family watched it. I thought, me and Dad would watch it, but even Mum, as somebody who, grew up with, having to live with Doctor Who fans, and so, has seen Doctor Who by osmosis, but also is interested in 1960s television and just the history and everything. She watched it and enjoyed it. So there was this really wonderful thing. And I watched it a few more times over the next couple of years. And then, unfortunately, as I looked harder at it, and as I read more about it, in particularly a very interesting Caldor City piece about it, I really started to see the problems with it, and got a little bit upset at some of the, not so much the historical inaccuracies, but I think some slightly nasty rewritings of history, which we'll no doubt talk about. And I kind of went off it in a big way, and haven't watched it for a while since. And so this was an excuse to come back and go, okay, how did I find it? And whilst I don't think I'll ever love it quite as much as I did when I first saw it, and whilst there were certainly moments and scenes in here that I was pulled out of it and I thought were disappointing and problematic, or whatever you might call it, at its heart, I just had this overwhelming feeling of this silly little TV show that we love, that we make podcasts about, we talk to our friends. I'm a grown adult and I have my friends over to watch Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest here. It's a show that we love.
Yeah.
And the idea that show got such a tribute to its creation is just so heartwarming, and there are some wonderful heartwarming moments in here. So I did recapture some of that love I have for it, although its flaws do exist.
That dovetails really nicely with a few of the notes I've made here, Dave, because I wanted to start, while we're still talking, like in the past, our thoughts at the time and all that sort of stuff. I want to start by saying, I know this is going to sound bizarre to some fans out there, but I'm still stunned that this was made.
Yes.
Full stop.
Yes.
I get that Doctor Who was 50. I get that Doctor Who has been watched by millions around the world. I get that it's not an obscure program. Of course I do. I understand that. But I've said this before. Doctor Who is still a very rare TV series insofar as many fans know the ins and outs of it. They know the script editors. They know the producers. Because of Doctor Who, they know how TV was made in 1974, and they can talk about the internal runnings of the BBC. And then we got this, just bowing at the altar of Doctor Who and mythologizing how it came to be. And I still think today, have I ever seen this in relation to any other TV show I've ever watched? And maybe there is something somewhere and it just doesn't come to mind, but I would say 99% of TV shows don't get this treatment. I mean, this is maybe a silly example, but Home and Away has run on TV here, Dave, for almost 40 years. Count them, 40. But have they ever made a drama about how Home and Away started? Do fans know who the producer of the 1994 Home and Away season was? No chance. It seems absurd that someone would know that. So, an adventure in space and time is a very odd beast when you stop and think about what's actually happening here, Dave. It's really odd.
It is just extraordinary to think that it happened, and we are very, very lucky. And you're right about it being a show where we obsess as fans about real behind-the-scenes detail that I think even, Star Trek fans wouldn't necessarily have that level of detail. And if I can sidestep just very quickly, my favourite example of that was my friend and friend of the podcast, Richard, was back in the late 90s sitting on the Doctor Who Club table at some event somewhere. I think it was like a collector's fair or a sci-fi event or something. And he was just sitting there, Doctor Who Club Victoria, join us, whatever. And this bloke walked up to the table and said, "Oh, hi, you're the Doctor Who Club, are you?" "Yeah, yes, we are." He said, "Well, I actually worked on the show." "Really?" "Yes, I was the production designer for one of the stories." "Oh, wow. Which one?" "Oh, the Mind Robber." To which Richard said to him, "Oh, wow, you must be Evan Hercules." And just watched Evan Hercules almost have a heart attack at the fact that this guy just knew that his name because he was the production designer on one show in 1969.
Yeah. Oh, look, that's even pretty obscure knowledge for a Doctor Who fan. I don't know that, for example. But I know exactly what you're saying.
Yes.
And look, broadly, I liked this when I first saw it back in the day. Just that sense of amazement that it existed at all. I thought that Bradley was good as Hartnell, even if his first Doctor was maybe a bit off base. And I just let myself sink down and indulge in this trip back to the 60s, which is maybe what your mother was doing, as well. Seeing the 60s recreated so nicely. Even when you'd stop and think and realise, oh, no, that wouldn't have happened, or, oh, no, they never rehearsed on finished sets, oh, no, Mervyn Pinfield was already dead before that scene could have happened. Park all of that. I broadly really liked it when it went out.
Yeah, so let's dovetail from that into perhaps talking about the history of the presentation of that history, because the interesting thing about it is that there are moments in there that are absolutely drawn from history. So, for example, the bit where Sidney Newman has to sweet-talk Hartnell and he's talking about all the movies he's seen that he loves is actually something that Donald Tosh witnessed and saw and has talked about. So there are things like that are absolutely true and perfect. And there are recreations in there that are absolutely true and perfect. There are other things that are clearly not. And I think there are some things I get and some things I find disappointing. So, for example, the speech the Doctor gives towards the end is the speech from the end of the massacre.
Yep.
That is recreated. Now, one of the sad things is that female director Paddy Russell has now become a man, which is disappointing given that this story is partly about wonderful female production people in the BBC at the 1960s.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, something I don't mind, is that before he gives that speech, they have the whole altercation about turning the central column on. Part of me sits there and goes, hang on, the TARDIS wasn't in flight when he gave that speech, because Stephen runs back in the door with Dodo in a moment's time. But I don't mind that because it gives us that moment where Hartnell is the only one on the set who knows how to turn the time rotor on and off. Yeah. And so he gets out there and does that. And he's sort of having that gruff conversation about, I've been here for 3 years and none of you know how to do anything. And that's an important part of the story. So I don't mind something being changed. The TARDIS was in flight. Yeah, that's fine. Because it is showing us what Hartnell was like at the time. And it's like, that story about Tom Baker when they were starting rehearsals a few years into his time, and a new director came in his first time on Doctor Who, and they were starting the rehearsals, and he said, right, I'm going to do some really innovative and interesting things with the console room. And Tom Becker's gone, look, I've been here for 3 years. There are 3 ways you can film the console room. If you do it your way, you'll see through the doors, you'll see the power cord, it won't work. So maybe just get on with what we know works and just shoot the bloody thing.
Yeah.
Hartnell was in that position. He was the only one there after 3 and a bit years. So I don't mind that sort of historical change because it serves the story. But there's other stuff in there that I just find really weird and almost offensive. Like suddenly Steve Brakaki, who, is this wonderful celebrated designer, was apparently an unprofessional asshole.
Yeah, he just sort of half-asses that design. He just grabs random bits and bobs off his table.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, yeah, there you go. There's the console. Pops some... I don't even know what that cardboard is that he's popping the circles out of, but he pops a few circles out. There you go. There's the walls. Be happy. Go away.
Yeah, so
I don't think that would have happened like that.
Yeah, so it's not that I'm sitting here going, well, that didn't really happen, or as you said, look, I get that, the Mervyn Pinfield character is kind of a combination of Mervyn Pinfield, David Whittaker, and others that would sort of come across, because you can't have 5 different characters all, chopping and changing. And so I get that that's an amalgamation. It's a shame David Whittaker isn't in there as well, but I get that he's sort of part of that character, and I get that, as you said, he was still having conversations about William Hartnell after Mervyn Pinfield had died.
Yeah.
I don't mind that. I know it, but I don't mind it. It's where they start to kind of demean individuals that I think it has a problem.
Oh, look, the Paddy Russell thing, to rewind when you talked about that 5 minutes ago, is huge, because I think they're trying to do a sense of female empowerment through this. Like, there's that line, they've never had a female producer here before, Sydney says to Verity. And I don't think that's true. I think there had been female producers at the BBC before her. So it's not the, Doctor Who broke the glass ceiling moment that I think they want it to be. And I think it's actually dangerous putting out ideas out there, in stuff like this, because people hear it and think it's true. Lambert wasn't Sydney Newman's first choice to produce Doctor Who. He had a couple of blokes in mind before her. So, it is trying to big up Verity and do a bit of a girl power thing. But at the same time, it then takes down Paddy Russell and doesn't show the audience that Paddy Russell was directing the massacre. Yeah, you're quite right. All of that said, though, Dave, and I'm just pulling back in my notes now, at the start of the show, there is that line from the BBC presenter. What would you call that? That's the continuity announcer, I guess.
Yeah.
That, you can't rewrite history, not one line, which is obviously cribbing on a Doctor Who line. And then he says, except perhaps when you embark on an adventure in space and time. So from the start, it's acknowledging that it's doing fiction, even though all these people existed, even though this is broadly how things went down, even though, as you mentioned, there are moments in this which were observed by other people and written down, so we know they happened. But the show also goes out of its way to say that it is a fiction, but I fear that, like many biopics and historical movies, people will think that all of it happened, and that's how it was.
Yeah.
Even the Cyberman smoking in the studio, there was no smoking in the studio.
Yeah, yes, and the Cybermen are the wrong colour. Yeah. Because a lot of their tubing was magenta. So, but again, I don't mind about that. But if I can pull a couple of quotes here from the Caldor City article that I did reference here.
Yeah, please.
And the first of all, it says here, Paddy Russell, who directed the massacre, has apparently had a sex change and become a man for a program supposedly made to celebrate the achievements of women in early television drama.
There you go.
This program seems awfully keen on airbrushing all the ones who aren't named Verity out of the picture. And there are some other things as well about some of the production people as well. And then I think to sort of emphasise a comment you just made there, Rob, the article finishes with this comment. Why does this matter? Because now, after this program has been repeated umpteen million times on BBC4, and you just know it will be, those of us who know better are going to be continually fighting the myth that Lambert was the only woman in an important job in the BBC in the 1960s, that Hartnell was some kind of babbling senile fool, and that the designers, composers and sheen sifters at the BBC were all a pack of Heath Robin-esque bumbling amateurs, and that it was a wonder they ever managed to remember to breathe. And I think that's what you were saying there. Whilst this is a celebration of the show, and I welcome it for that, and I enjoy it a lot of it, and we will talk about the stuff I enjoy in a moment, I promise. I think that when it does revise history, the problem is that that will seep into the historical record. And so let's talk about the big one, the one that I guess I have the biggest problem with, and that is the writing of William Hartnell. Mm-hmm. Now, I absolutely accept that he was a cantankerous old bugger who would be difficult on set and certainly thought he was irreplaceable, and certainly, as we saw in that scene I described, literally did know more about producing the show than the producers. I get that, and that was what in the end led to him being sacked from the show. He said about John Wiles to the BBC, either he goes or I go, and they're like, oh, we can't get rid of William Hart. Like, I guess you're leaving, John. And then he didn't get on with Innes Lloyd and said, well, either he goes or I go. And they're like, you know what, William, maybe the problem's you. And have you met Patrick Troughton?
Yeah.
You know, whereas they've leaned into the sort of the whole myth about he was so sick and he was so ill and his arteriosclerosis, which wasn't diagnosed nearly that early. He may have been starting to get it, but it certainly wasn't a big part of his life. And his wife certainly wasn't aware of it because it wasn't diagnosed. You know, the idea that he couldn't remember his lines. But again, you listen to The Massacre, he is word perfect in his big speech at the end. He's word perfect with a strong, clear performance as the Abbot of Amboise. So, you know, these are myths. And I think it is to the detriment of the memory of Hartnell that we say he was a bumbling, senile, sick old fool. Whereas, you know, there is a dramatic truth. He was a very capable actor who was also a cantankerous old bastard. And when the two of those clashed, it was time to move him on. I just think you can kind of, I don't know, I just think you can tell that story without having to bring down Hartnell and make him seem sick.
Yeah, it's interesting because the TV movie shows that he's difficult to work with and thinks he's the most important person on the show, and does highlight it in that way you mentioned with the console, that he's the only one who knows how to turn it on because he's the only one who's been there for the 3 years or whatever at that point in time. Or
even that no one's irreplaceable, are they? You know, when he's sort of looking at the Doctor Who annual with him on the cover.
Yeah, exactly. I lean in towards that being more why he was let go of than the fluffs. And I mean, people talk of these fluffs. In some of the stories, people say it's a fluff. It was actually an ad lib. So.
Or scripted.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. So, you know, not everything in this, again, it can skew people towards thinking, oh yeah, he got really sick and he knew he was sick and blah, blah, blah. And he was also a bit of a bastard. No, it was more, he was a bit of a bastard and maybe he was getting a little bit sick. You know, it's almost flipped on its head the way this presents things.
All of that said, we do get this wonderful 1960s recreation. And one of the things that I think does work so well about this is it really does just highlight and celebrate the extraordinary simplicity and innovation of the BBC at that time, where someone like Sidney Newman could just go, I need a program, it needs to be this, it needs to go here, let's do some sci-fi, you're hired, you can do this. And they just go make a show. And it's not in development hell for 10 years, and it's just creatives being creative in a really simple environment. Putting it on TV, there were did we have ITV by then? I think ITV's the late 50s, so we might have had 2, maybe 3 channels at this point. When did BBC Two launch? Doesn't matter. The point is that, you know, there wasn't a lot of TV around at that point, and most people watched one channel, so it was just a simpler time where people just tried stuff and just got on and did it. And also then the innovation that comes from that, the creation of that wonderful theme music that's still with us today, those wonderful opening credits, the TARDIS sound effect, the way it shows that, and like that, it just blows my mind. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Look, I agree. And when we did our Bob and Dave do Bob and Dave episode, I was talking about how these two guys just sort of got together and said, we should write some TV. And they just started writing some scripts and chatting to some people at the BBC, and next thing they had a job. And that was like the late 60s, early 70s. We're going back almost another decade earlier here. Extraordinary times where you could be so free and adventurous with your TV. Yeah,
Verity Lambert I said I'll give myself a year to get on, and if I don't, I'll try something else. Like, I'm just going to have a crack at TV and see if I'm good at it. It's extraordinary, but it captures that spirit really, really well. I think that's one of the big strengths of the show.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And look, I just do want to recap on what we were talking about a moment ago, because I've just found it in my notes. For parts of the story that couldn't have happened or didn't happen in the way they're portrayed. I'm probably less bothered with it now than what I was in 2013. I think as I get older, I haven't mellowed so much as just resigned myself to things aren't always going to be what I expect them to be. Maybe the same as how I'm disappointed by other people's behaviour in real life because they don't act the way I would act, so I try and hold them to account, and that's never going to work. Similarly with TV shows, something might be not done in a way that I would write it or with less care than how I would do it, but increasingly I'm like, oh, hey-ho, what's done is done. It exists. It's not the worst thing in the world,
Yeah, as I said, I'm a lot more at peace with it now than I was when I first really started to think about it, which is a natural thing and I think a good thing. Let's also talk about the effort they went to recreate a lot of classic moments in the scene's history. And the moment that really hit me was when they reenacted that episode, that part of Invasion of the Daleks Part 2 where the Daleks come over Westminster Bridge.
Yes.
And that was the moment I really sat there and thought, they've recreated something from 49 years ago to celebrate this story. How extraordinary is that? How amazing is that? And I really did get sort of, shivers up the spine or whatever you want to call it at seeing that, perhaps more than I did with any other of the recreations.
Yeah, or when they're doing Reign of Terror or something like that. Or when they do Marco Polo and they even do the line, which I'm sure we've said on the podcast before, wouldn't it be great if this was in colour? and just acknowledging that those sets were amazing. And they've built some of those Marco Polo sets. That's not CGI.
No, they absolutely have. They've made Menoptera costumes, and again, part of the joy of seeing it the first time, because I really loved it the first couple of times I saw it, was just that, oh my god, there's a guy in a Menoptera costume. They've made a Menoptera costume. Just how cool is that? That's a level of creativity and love that's really important. And that's another example. Verity gives her farewell speech on the set of The Wet Planet, when it should be the set of Mission to the Unknown. But I get it because visually, The Web Planet is an extraordinary set with Menoptera and Zabi and all the rest of that. And so I get they've gone, well, that's a much better thing to show. Yeah. That's fine. I don't think that's historical revisionism. That's just being practical.
Wouldn't it be weird to have a Menoptera in the audience when she's giving her speech? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally get that.
Should we talk about the cast?
We should talk about the cast, and I'll start by echoing what you mentioned in passing earlier, Rob. I think that David Bradley is brilliant here as Hartnell. He makes Hartnell feel like a real person. He was a real person, which helps, but he does make it feel like a real person with good moods, bad moods. It's a lovely performance. When he's being grumpy, you feel as though this is a guy who's grumpy or hurt, and when his heart's big and he's overawed at the school kids that want to meet him, you feel that as well. It's a great performance. I don't think he's very good as the First Doctor. I don't think he captures the First Doctor at all. No,
I agree. And yet I've heard that his Big Finish turn as the Doctor is better. So I'm wondering, like on TV, we've had him in doing Hartnell in doing the First Doctor, I should say, in Twice Upon a Time, and we've had him doing the First Doctor in little scenes in this, and he's not so good. But apparently in the Big Finish stuff, he's really good, and it could just be a scripting thing.
Look, it could be. But I guess he felt as though he also had to differentiate between playing William Hartnell and playing William Hartnell playing the First Doctor. And perhaps in that effort to differentiate the two, he's perhaps gone slightly stronger in certain directions that I don't think quite work. And the other thing as well is it's unfortunate for David Bradley that he's occasionally recreating scenes that all of us know by heart. Yeah. So, for example, when he's doing the farewell speech to Susan, I don't only know that by heart in terms of the words, but I know the tempo, I know the intonation. Someday I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back. Until then, there must be no regrets, no tears, no anxiety. I know all the ups and downs of that speech. And so when he's not exactly word beat perfect, I'm like, oh, you got that wrong. And that's just because I'm a sad fan. That's unfortunate. But I don't think he brings the, as you put it, Rob, the Yoda-like spark to the First Doctor that's necessary. No. Which is a shame because he absolutely brings that spark to Hartnell. And look, if it's going to be anywhere, that's where it should be.
Yeah. It's tricky with Hartnell the man too, because there's not that much outside of productions footage of him. There's like the Desert Island Discs audio, and then there's that interview with him. I think he's doing panto or something, and he's sitting in the chair putting on his makeup, and he seems really pissed off in that. And it's like, is that just his demeanour, or is he pissed off at doing this interview, or is he pissed off about being asked about Doctor Who, which he's now left, or what is it? But beyond that, there's not a lot of him. We don't have him on morning chat shows or anything to really get a sense of the man. But I still think, my gut still says, based on what we know of him, that David Bradley did nail him as a man. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Brian Cox, I know, felt like a big deal turning up at the time, and now is an even bigger deal.
Oh, it's quite a coup now to look back and say, we had Brian Cox in this, given how hot property is because of things like Succession and so on.
But I mean, he'd already done X-Men 2 well before this as well. Like, he was already a big name.
Yeah, true. And I'd liked him for a long time, going back to the 1990s. I know he has a career before the 1990s, but for me, the 1990s, he was Major Hogan in the first couple of Sharp TV movies with Sean Bean. And I thought he was great as Major Hogan. I was really disappointed when he didn't continue in that role.
And I was just going to add, his turn as Hermann Goering in the Nuremberg telemovie is exceptionally good as well.
There you go. All of that said, though, despite being a great actor, I think his Sidney Newman is almost a caricature. You look at archival footage of Sidney, and he seems like a quieter, much more gentle kind of guy. Indeed, in the 60s material I've seen, he's really enunciating his words in a super British kind of way. So when Cox is doing this, and you did this about 5 minutes ago in the podcast, Dave, when you did an impression of him, when Cox is doing this sort of Hollywood agent sort of, hey kid, come with me and I'll make you a star, you know?
Yeah.
It really doesn't gel with this softer Canadian TV executive, to my mind. I'll say that much.
It's interesting because I think you're right, but I also think the Sidney Newman character is less about this is Sidney Newman as it is about let's try and capture what was happening in the BBC at this moment, where this brash Canadian from ITV came in and tried to shake up a very sort of sedate world and also capture that energy and that culture that was around as well. And so I think this is another one where if this was the Sidney Newman movie, you'd go, that was a very bad performance. But because this is the William Hartnell Doctor Who movie, you go, he's embodying what we need to be embodied.
Yeah, all the, hey kid, I'm going to give you Doctor Who, you know?
Yeah. Pop,
you're
pop,
the
pop.
producer. Pop, pop, pop.
Pop, pop, pop. Yeah, like, I get why that works dramatically, and I think that I think it works.
Yeah. Jessica Raine as Verity Lambert. Dave, do you want to lead or will I?
You go for it, Rob.
I think Jessica has a really strong look for pieces that are set back in time. I think she looked really smashing in the Matt Smith episode Hyde, which was set in the mid-70s. She was really good in the TV series Partners in Crime, which was set in the 50s, based on the Agatha Christie novels. And I wish they'd made more of that show. I thought it was great. And whenever I'd see her in Call the Midwife, I thought, yeah, she just looks like she belongs in this era. She just has that look. And I think with her hair done in a particular way, I think she's a good match for Verity. Visually, you know, not perfect, but you go, yeah, that's Verity Lambert. And her acting is on point. But I think what's less successful with her is her dialogue is full of exposition and telling us what kind of person she is. And I totally get why that's there. You know, they've got limited time to convey quite a lot of information to people who don't know anything about Doctor Who's beginnings. People like your mum, Dave. The stuff she's saying is giving your mum all this amazing information, but it's stuff that we know. And there are times when she's talking and I'd think, there's no way a real person would sound like this. You know, I almost laughed at some of the things she said, not because they were actually funny, but because no one would actually say those things about themselves out loud to another person.
Yeah, look, I see what you're saying. I didn't really pick that up. I thought it was a fantastic performance, and it is the through line of the movie in many ways, as much really as Hartnell is. It's the story of her, and I think that Jessica Raine does capture that fighting spirit, that determination that Verity would have had to have to get on in the BBC. I think that we do get those moments of her facing the ultra masculine society that was the BBC, that very white male sort of British 1960s culture. She captures that really well. We see her desperation at times, which I think is good. She's not shown as this brilliant, perfect woman who never put a step wrong. She makes mistakes, she makes errors, she fixes them, and so you get to go through that dramatic sort of low point and then get to the whole seeing the Dalek kids playing the Daleks on the bus. I think it works really well. It's a lovely performance.
Yeah, and look, just to heighten that, she is the Jewish female, and they team her up with a gay person of colour in Waris Hussein. Do you want to lead on Waris Hussein?
Yeah, look, I mean, again, Sacha Dhawan was a known person at that stage. He'd done the History Boys and everything, but he's a much bigger name now, so it's another piece of just really good advanced casting. And it is interesting that they've picked Waris Hussein of sort of those early directors and sort of made him director, even though he only did Unearthly Child and Marco Polo. He's kind of the one. I get that. You've got to sort of have a homogenous figure. But yes, again, they're highlighting that sense that if you're not a straight white male from Oxbridge, then this is not your world, and you've got to sort of make your way into that. I'm glad that Gaddis, and let's face it, Gaddis would know better than all of us, that yes, the BBC was officially a straight white male production, but let's not pretend there were not a lot of homosexuals working there at the time. And indeed Jewish people. I mean, it's that comment when, people always have that, spread that fake rumor, William Hartnell wouldn't work with this actor because he was gay and Jewish. It's like, if William Hartnell wouldn't work with anybody who was gay or Jewish, he would not be working at the BBC, full stop, in the 1960s. So let's just put that to bed. But
And he loved working with Verity Lambert, who was Jewish. Yeah.
Exactly. So we can put that one to bed. But yes, that sense of, you've got to work 3 times harder to make it in this world if you're not part of the Oxbridge establishment, is sold there. And I think it's sold really well. It's sold with actual, imitable, genuine moments. Not being able to get a drink, being put to the back of the queue, not getting quite the offers that you'd normally get. And look, I even did like the line about, I've been offered a passage to India. Oh, one way. Like, I thought, although that's completely inappropriate workplace joke, it so sums up just the culture of the 1960s. And I don't think that, Hartnell was a horrible racist. He just told jokes that anybody would have told in the 1960s.
Oh, people would have been saying a line like that into the 1980s easily, and possibly even the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Gaddis doesn't shy away from showing the warts and all of the culture, but he also doesn't lean into look at how terrible they were, boys and girls. Look at how bad it was back in the day. We're so much. He just shows it and lets us go, wow, it was a different time, wasn't it?
Yeah. Look, I think Sacha comes across just fine, and my notes were largely about what you've already discussed, because it's sort of confusing how long he hangs out with Verity. Here he's sort of shown as hanging around and discussing their show and all of this, and it's like, well, that's not quite right, but I see what it's doing, and it's helping the not we in the audience just have these two to have conversations and not introduce new people all the time with Verity, I guess.
Yeah, it would have been weird if suddenly, she's talking to Waris Hussein and now she's talking to Christopher Barry. Oh, no, now Waris Hussein's back for Marco Polo. And, I get it. You sort of have to have an homogenous character. One of the biggest stars in this, Rob?
Yes?
Kit Connor.
Who?
Heartstopper's Kit Connor, now quite a big name actor.
Oh, I know where this is going. Yeah, you posted a picture the other day.
Yes, he is the grandson watching the Daleks with William Hartnell. Now a much bigger name. I think will be an even bigger name in 10 years' time. But genuinely, did you spot all the cameos, Rob?
Look, I know that William Russell, or William Enoch, as he sometimes is credited, is the security guard at the BBC.
Yes.
And I believe Carol Ann Ford is the mother calling the kids in.
Yes.
Early in the piece. But you blink and you miss her, really.
Yeah,
with that one.
I must admit, I caught Carol Ann Ford the very first time I watched it instantly, and it wasn't the look, it was just the voice. The way she calls for the two kids did just have the same intonation as the Ian, Barbara, that she did so many times in her time. So I caught that as well. But in Verity's leaving scene, Jean Marsh is there.
Oh, really?
And I caught Jean Marsh the first time, and then a couple of times later I've gone, who's standing next to Jean Marsh? Oh, wow, that's Maureen O'Brien.
Wow, no, I didn't pick those.
Yeah, so they're both. There's a shot of them when they look out. It's Verity's point of view when she's looking out into the crowd, and right in the centre, I go, well, that's Jean Marsh, and then yes, later on I've gone, oh, that's Maureen O'Brien as well.
Speaking of Ian and Barbara, why don't we do these as a threesome? You got Jamie Glover as William Russell, Gemma Powell as Jacqueline Hill, and Claudia Grant as Carol Ann Ford. I think this original TARDIS team looks pretty good and comes across pretty well. Aside from Ian, I've seen people praise Jamie Glover, but I don't think he looks like William Russell at all.
I think he's the one that least looks like the person he's meant to be, but most acts like the person he's meant to be.
Do you really?
I do, yeah.
Because I wasn't even sure it was a good impression of William Russell or Ian Chesterton, however you want to look at it.
Interesting. No, I thought he really, really did capture it. So interesting. Okay.
Okay. But yeah, that original TARDIS team looks good. But I mean, Dave, in terms of people not looking like other people, Michael Craze.
He's about 2 foot taller. and it's extraordinary, given he has no dialogue. They didn't need to cast someone who could act or act like him. They just needed to cast a look-alike. Yeah, that was a bit bizarre.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I mean, because who have we got? We've got people doing Maureen O'Brien, we've got Peter Purvis, Jackie Lane, and of course Craze and Wills. I don't think any of them really have dialogue, do they? They could all be just like models who look like the real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the case. The one who couldn't be a model and did have dialogue was the chap playing Patrick Troughton, who I believe only got the job because he's Gaddis's mate.
Yeah, similar to the Ben casting, the second Doctor casting bewilders me, Dave. And perhaps it shouldn't, as Rhys Shearsmith, let's rip the Band-Aid off, is great mates with Gatiss, so it's hard to miss a possible angle there. But the truth be told, I've sort of come around to how he does Troughton at the end of the story. I'm still not sold on it, and I remember at the time this went out, I was really annoyed with it, because, in quotation marks, Gatiss has hired his mate, and he's nothing like Troughton.
Yes.
And so that was just annoying me and I think colouring my impression of what he was doing. But I've mellowed on it a bit, maybe just a bit. But when he does a couple of lines, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, look, I'm not as egregiously overtly against this as I was when I first saw it. I was going, what the hell is going on? Why was this guy cast? And then, yes, you find out that, he was Gaddis's mate, and then you see that they even went to the point of making Gaddiss a Pertwee costume so that they could recreate all these publicity stills from the Three Doctors together. And it's like, okay, that is doing a little bit too indulgent. I don't think it quite works. I believe Gaddis's husband also plays, it's either Richard Martin or Douglas Campfield in the Invasion of the Daleks recreation.
Oh, really?
I believe so. So,
okay.
Gaddis isn't above casting his friends and lovers, but that's fair enough. I do want to talk about Gaddis. Have we finished on the cast, or you got more to do there?
I think it's also worth, because this is interesting, well, to me at least, they put Nick Briggs in there doing the voices of the Daleks.
Yes.
But as far as I'm aware, at this point in time, they didn't have someone sitting on the set doing the voices of the Daleks like that. So, I mean, I think it happened later on in the show's history, so they're sort of showing how it was done later, but certainly not in the early days. But they still managed to sort of shoehorn Nick Briggs in.
Yeah, I was glad, though, that they did actually try to make the ring modulator sound like the Daleks of 1963, as opposed to when Briggs usually does it and he does his own 21st century version of the Dalek voice. I'm glad they didn't do that. So a rare thing for me. I'll give Nick Briggs a pass on this one.
Okay.
So Mark Gaddis's script, I think, is the full Gaddis, in that it absolutely embodies Gaddis's love for the show. It absolutely embodies Gaddis's love for drama and for storytelling, and you see that come through the way that it's shot. Gaddis, I think, does get the balance right in showing the outsider perspectives of Verity and Waris Hussein, and does it in a way that's realistic and not preachy. I think it's really good, and that's no doubt come a bit from Gaddis's own experiences as a gay man working in television. I do think, though, occasionally you do see Gaddis's smugness come through as well. Yeah. There are definitely lines dropped in where you go, okay, that's just put in to show off, that piece of knowledge or that quote. One of the more obscure ones that I think was really clunky was he has William Hartnell actually quote from that Hartnell Panto interview that you mentioned earlier, Rob. The whole thing about, I'm a legitimate actor, a legitimate character actor, is sort of, quite infamous line from that interview.
Oh, God, of course it is. I didn't pick that.
Yeah, that he drops in. And I think it does sound quite clunky when it's put in there. And I just gone, Gaddis, you're being a little bit too cute, a little bit too smug in there. And and at times I think that does work to his detriment. And look, that's Mark Gaddis, right? He's this fun, energetic, loving character who's occasionally a little bit smug and a little bit out there, and I guess his work reflects that. I say that
he's a super fan.
I say that having never met Mark Gaddis. That's just the impression I get of him, so probably talking nonsense. But that's the impression I get, and that's what I thought came through here.
Yeah, and as I said, he's a super fan, so of course he's throw in stuff like this at times.
Yeah, and I think sometimes he should have resisted the urge, because as a viewer and as a superfan myself, someone who can pick up these lines, I actually don't want to, because I want to be drawn into the idea that this is a recreation of Britain in the 1960s. And the moment you drop in a clump of dialogue from the 1970s or a reference to something from the 1990s, you go, yeah, that's right, it's just a TV script written by Mark Gatiss. It's not real. Oh, that's a shame. And you have to sort of come back into it. It does take me out a bit. So I think, as amusing as those things probably seem when you're writing them, for me, I think you should resist them.
Yeah, fair enough. I've hit a point in my notes, Dave, where I don't know how this will even fit in, but I want to get it in because you've mentioned a piece from the Caldor City website that you've read and got some information from. I want to do a shout out to tech-ops.co.uk. They have a page called An Adventure in Time and Space Errors, where a lot of production people who were not just in the BBC at the time, but actually working on Doctor Who, have given a wealth of comments. It feels like they've all just watched this and messaged each other about it, and all these messages have been collected on this website. Now, mostly this is super techie stuff, because I believe that's the focus of techops.co.uk. But it was still quite interesting to see how much stuff that would go flying over our heads that we haven't discussed here, like what kind of cameras they're using on set and what the mixing desk looked like and what they would even wear on their feet in the studio, how there was no smoking in the studio, that's something I mentioned earlier, or even how the camera commands that Sacha Dhawan as Waris Hussein is giving are all so very, very wrong. It clearly drives these techie types up the wall to see their personal history being recreated so badly. And you can read all these collected messages on this Tech Ops page. So, yeah, it's one to go out and search if you're so inclined. Probably not the most fascinating thing for me to read through, even a selection of them here in a big clump. But do look that up as well, because I found that quite fascinating. So I don't mind sort of knowing stuff about TV production in general. Yeah.
Yeah, look, it's probably a bit like when I watch a Top Gun movie and I listen to some of the air traffic control commands and just, twitch a little bit knowing what's wrong and what's right. But I get it, because the audience needs to understand. And if you make it too techie and correct, it's not going to necessarily work. Whereas what Dhawan is doing, as somebody who doesn't know the technical terms, I can understand what he's doing. So I do sort of get that. But then you do get the more egregious ones, as I say, like this idea that the sprinklers would go off in a recording studio with electronic equipment. Like, yeah, I mean, even by OH&S standards of the 1960s, that would not have been acceptable. And it's trying to give this impression of just how primitive and almost neglected Doctor Who was. But it does sort of lead to this idea of, these people were so simple and stupid, they would allow sprinklers to go off over electronic equipment. Like, bit too much.
Yeah, we saw how water goes in a studio with the Sophie drowning incident.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Very good. So, Dave, that's been a really good discussion. I'll sort of round it out. I mean, there's many things we could still talk about, many bits and pieces we could nitpick. Even just Sydney Newman saying, "Kid, we got 10 million on the Daleks," when they hadn't had 10 million viewers at that point in time on the episodes that had gone out. But draw a line under that. My biggest fear with any biopic or historical drama is, as I said earlier, that people buy into them as being reality. And it shouldn't need to be said that this stuff isn't reality. The story has that disclaimer at the start. It couldn't be any more overt. Yet I fear with this and things of this nature, people get an impression of what was going on that can sometimes be so far from reality. It's dangerous, to having a fair and balanced view of things. The whole Verity Lambert thing being so important. And a woman too, damn it. It over-eggs the pudding. It airbrushes out Paddy Russell. All of that. Hartnell's illness. It's sad to me. Shows like this have the potential to do harm. But again, it's par for the course with biopics and historical drama. So we're not talking that this is some strange outlier in doing these things by any means. And I think similar to you, I like this. And again, I still can't believe they made this. I can't overemphasize that point enough. That's my main point of this whole thing. I can't believe this exists, Dave. And I enjoyed rewatching it this time.
Yeah. At the moment when you get the Matt Smith cameo, and you do get that sense of, wow, 50 years later, we're still here, still making this show, you just go, wow. Like you, I just can't believe they made this. I can't believe that this show is still going. It's just absolutely extraordinary. So I did like it a lot more this time than I did the last times. I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the first time. That magic, I think, is now gone and isn't coming back, because I can see the errors in there. I can excuse and understand a number of the historical inaccuracies because it's got to tell a story. I get that. I can't excuse some of the ones that are perhaps erasing people and also just reflecting very badly on people, and where it doesn't really particularly add to the drama. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag there. As a piece of television, I think it is extremely well made, extremely loving, and extremely enjoyable. As a piece of historical drama, it is a mixed bag at best.
Yeah. Question without notice. At the time it went out, people were quite confused by the ending and wondering what the appearance of Matt Smith meant. What does it mean to you? What's going on there?
I simply saw that as an acknowledgement that even though this is the end of William Hartnell's time, the show is going to continue without him, and it's going to continue very successfully without him. Although I did while you were talking about it, I did find the Candle City line, which is, what does the appearance of Matt Smith's Doctor actually mean? That Hartnell was capable of seeing into the future? That Doctor Who is real? That the dramatisation is a complete fiction and therefore a fictional character can turn up in it? And yes, there were a lot of single takes, but I totally saw it the first time as, although this is your last day here, Mr. Hartnell, what you started will be incredibly successful. And it also said to me, as a big Hartnell fan, all these people who love Tennant and Smith and Gatwell, whatever, just remember, none of this would have happened without William Hartnell.
Yeah, exactly. He's not seeing Matt Smith. He's not seeing anything. It's not his arteriosclerosis playing up. Smith just represents the future that I think Hartnell is thinking about.
Yeah,
and we do owe him a huge debt, and I think that's a good note to end on.
I think so too.
Alrighty, that was our chat on Adventure in Space and Time. Hope you enjoyed it. We've got, Dave, a ton of listener messages, and I think even since I did up these show notes, I've got some Joy to the World hot take comments that you might not have. So should I start with those?
Go on, you do those, yes.
All right. Martin Wells says, I thought it was one of the best Christmas specials for years. Peter Field follows up with, like most Christmas crackers, I love the bang and pop and then laugh at being underwhelmed. In this instance, I was happy with my Christmas dessert, and like 15, yes, the emotions were triggered. A drunken 7 out of 10 for me. And then finally, Auton Green Death on X says, thumbs up here. Not a classic, but the best Christmas show / New Year's special for a while.
That's all very fair. Shall I keep us going with a comment from Constable Hansy on our Bob and Dave do Bob and Dave episode?
Please.
Love Axos and the Mutants. Yes, really. Not so keen on their Tom stories, although the Invisible Enemy is fun. Don't think anyone could accuse them of thinking small. And I'm a big fan of The Nightmare of Eden, albeit it's just one of the dynamic duo behind it.
Jonathan Sinjem Satathiam comments via YouTube on our Did the Fifth Doctor Wear a Cricket Outfit video from a year or so back. Gosh, that's bringing back memories. Jonathan says, this is a terrific, though nerdy, rabbit hole to go down, and very well done. Thank you for putting this together. I think it's worth noting just how incredibly cool the Black Orchid episode was during Davison's run. Also, in general, those fellows were wearing more period-correct kits for a leisurely gentleman's afternoon of cricket and cocktails on the lawn. It would have been super cool if one of the participants, or at least one of the spectators, had commented something like, my word, what an eccentric and unusual outfit. I wonder what club he belongs to. Or, splendid, now that you're here, sir, let's get you kitted out with some proper boots. It might have also been a great moment for Peter to do one of his fun, awkward bits about an uncomfortable subject, or even pull off one of the classic Tom Baker gags where he tells them a charming little story about an historical character who gifted him the outfit, like Madame Nostradamus knitting him his scarf. I'm glad that Doctor Who nerds like us have forums like this to revel in our anoraks. Cheers.
Thanks very much. Another comment from Constable Hansy, this time on our top 5 villains episode of the Listmakers. Good lists. I went for Lady Adrasta from Creature from the Pit, Vivian Fay, Helen A, Azure from Flux, thought she was great, Eldrad #1, and did consider Mara possessed Tegan.
Interesting. Now, on the topic of Adrasta, Now that Constable Hansy raised that on YouTube, we've had some other comments. Steve Panozzo on X said, not even an honourable mention for Lady Adrasta. Sadly, not a mention. Tim Hunter on Facebook said, I hope Lady Adrasta is in the top 5 at least. Craig Wellington, also on Facebook, said, Adrasta, Dravens, lol, Kara. Were Adrasta and Kara wearing the same kit? And finally, Lucy McCall on Blue Sky said, Lady Adastra. So a lot of love for Lady Adastra there, Dave. We didn't have her.
No, I considered her. I didn't think she was better than the 5 that I picked, but obviously got a lot of fans. That's really cool. That's cool. Sometime co-host Mike Solko comments on our top 5 villains list. Dave's number 4 pick wasn't on my radar, yet it was a top-notch pick. A few others. Lady Painfort, better than the story around her. Shassini, see above. The Duchess from Rogue, and Delta stole Billy from Ray. So she's a villainess.
I like that. And now, Doctor Who author Kate Orman has her say on female villains. I think this comment was from Blue Sky. So many possible favourites, but Marga from Galaxy 4 would be in my top 5. That speech where she's gloating about leaving the Doctor and co to die, you realise she's a stone-cold psychopath. Blimey.
Yes, good call there from Kate Orman, and I did have Marga in my list. Yes. Lord Rev Cole on Blue Sky has some more thoughts on this topic. He mentions Hilda Winters from Robot, Kaftan from the Tim the Cyberman, and the evil Mara / Tegan.
Yes, now Stephen Moffat, and no, not that Stephen Moffat, comments on our Return of the King Alternate Galaxies episode. He says, top podcast lads, thoroughly enjoyed this. Was surprised that I think King Theoden's last speech didn't come up. It's a personal fave. You know the, I go to my fathers and even in their mighty company, I shall now not be ashamed one. I love that line and quote it to the missus after any major achievement, like when I empty the dishwasher, mow the lawn, etc. Thanks, chaps. Great work.
That's fantastic. Thank you for the comment, Steve. I hope people did enjoy our Return of the King episode. And finally, we have a comment from Gareth Davies talking about our Season 11 episode from almost 3 years ago, who says, great review, guys. I only just stumbled on this. Season 11 is largely overlooked. I guess due to it being the final Pertwee year. Personally, I'll take it over Season 10. Controversial, I know. You know what? I don't know if I agree, Gareth, but I could certainly entertain that argument.
Yeah, and thanks for finding such an old episode and commenting on it. I love that these things are evergreen, especially on YouTube, where we have cut-down versions of the monthly shows, and it's just the topic. Those topics seem to be very evergreen, and people do stumble across them, like this one, almost 3 years later. Wow. Very,
very exciting. Before we go, Rob, what have you been watching this month? Now that we're all on holiday, we've all got time to watch stuff.
Oh, it's great, isn't it? I've been continuing my Japanese series on Netflix, which are, if people have heard past episodes, Aro, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Akura, Cold Case Investigation, and Talentless Takano. Takano has now finished, and it was fun and silly, but Aro and Akura are still going, and they've really, and I mean this, really morphed to much bigger storylines. I mean, Aro's gone off in a it's a battle of the gods like direction. Akura's gone off in like internal affairs and dark stuff happening in the police force. It's really good stuff. I also watched Chastity High, which does sound like a porno, but was a really interesting take on this school in Japan. It's a fiction. It's not a documentary or anything. It's a fiction. This school in Japan that bans romance, and this girl who is poor and on a scholarship starts blackmailing her classmates who are having relationships, like contacting them through social media and saying, look, I've got pictures of you two kissing outside of school. Give me this much money or I'll report it to the headmaster, because the kids are getting expelled if they have relationships. So that was a really interesting series too. I've also rewatched Star Blazers Space Battleship Yamato 2199, which I think is better than the original from the 70s. I know that was probably heresy to some people, but it is. And I've started Skeleton Crew. Is it Goonies in space? Yes. But I like the vibe. I've got about 3 episodes left to drop. I think you'd like this, Dave. It's what happens when Disney Star Wars just tries to tell a fun adventure story. And finally, I haven't watched it, but Squid Game Season 2 has dropped a few days ago, and I'm really looking forward to watching that. Thank God I'm on holidays, yes.
That's a lot, Rob. I've had some other Star Wars liking friends who've said the same thing about Skeleton Crew. I've seen one episode.
You have?
I thought it was okay, and I will watch more. I'm yet to be sucked in or turned off it, so I'm looking forward to watching some more of it.
Oh, that's just the setup. It goes off. They go off into the universe and do stuff after that episode.
Yeah, no. Look, I'm sure they are. It is something I will get to probably this week. I have watched a fair bit because we're home from work this week, Rob. It's been
great.
lovely. Following your comment last month, I did watch The Diplomat Season 2. Right. I thought the first half was really good and really interesting, and then just nothing happened for the second half, which was a shame. But it was nice to hear AUKUS shouted out and Australia get a mention. I've watched the new adaptation of The Day of the Jackal, which is absolutely brilliant. It stars Eddie Redmayne as the Jackal. It is beautifully shot across the world. It looks fantastic. It's got great characters and it's really tense. You absolutely feel the tension. You're not quite. It's one of those shows that's willing to throw punches, so you're never quite sure which way any moment's going to go. And it also makes you care about even minor characters. So nice. I just think this is one of the best things I've watched in a very long time. The Day of the Jackal. I've only heard other people say good things about it as well. That is definitely something to check out. I've watched a bit of the new adaptation of The Talented Mr. Ripley called just Ripley. I will say, look, I love the movie adaptation of that, which turns the book into a very good movie. I know this show is a lot closer to the book, and I think occasionally suffers because of that. It feels like a book rather than a TV show, so not sure if I'll keep going with it, but interesting. I finally finished season 1 of Wednesday. Not sure the story really holds up, but it's held together by the visuals, the characters, the acting, etc. So it's an enjoyable watch, and I'll certainly watch season 2 when it's out in the new year.
Jenna Ortega is so good.
Yeah, she is so good. She holds it all together, and I think the fact that the story doesn't really work is frankly irrelevant. And the way they made Thing a character was just incredibly good. So I enjoyed that. I've started on Alex Rider season 3. I've just signed up to a 1-week trial of a particular network to quickly watch that. So I'm going to get that done in a week. And once that's done, the next thing is to finally pull out the Babylon 5 remastered Blu-ray set, and I'll start doing a rewatch at least of the first season of Babylon 5, and I will perhaps do a bit of tweeting or Xing or blue skying about that as I go. So keep an eye out for that if you follow me on social media.
Oh, that's really nice. Excellent. Well, we've both been watching some really great stuff, and it's fun when people get on social media and say, oh, because of you mentioning X, I'm now watching it too, and it's like, oh, fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And indeed, I often get tips from other listeners as well, so that's fantastic.
Fantastic. Now, next time, Dave, it'll be my traditional, I'll do a list makers next month. I'll do that much, but it's my month to take the monthly show off. So you're going to have another Camp David visit, I believe.
Yes, Richard and Mark are booked in. We're still working out exactly what we do. We haven't done a podcast of Decision for 2 years, so leaning towards that, but we may come up with a topic or something. But we will be doing our January episode with all our other normal twists and trims, although January usually there aren't a lot of them. But before we get to that, Rob, you said thank you to our wonderful listeners. I just want to say thank you and Happy New Year to my wonderful co-host. When we say we've put out 5 episodes this month, that's easy for me. I research, I make notes, and I talk. That's fine. You also edit, Rob. And I'm very, very appreciative of the production work you do to make me sound so good. So thank you for your work this year.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind and sweet of you to say. As I was saying to you off mic, literally before we turned the mics on earlier, I actually enjoy editing. I don't know if that's weird, because I hear other podcasters complain about it, and indeed there are some podcasts that don't seem to edit at all. But I actually enjoy doing it. So, look, right back at you. Thank you for being my co-host, not just this year, but for 9 seasons now, 9 year-long seasons. We're going into our 10th season in January. My God.
No, absolutely. Look, it's always fun. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't. That's enough indulgence. India are 5 for 175. So, thank you for listening, everybody. We'll see you in 2025.
Thank you, and see you then.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to
The Doctor Who Show with Rob and Dave.
Find us online by searching for
The Doctor Who Show.
We also love it when you write in. Drop us a line anytime at hello@thedwshow.net.